With communist revolutions, a lot of people have suffered, and it gets sold as something that's positive for the poor. All right, and from what history has said, millions of people have died, millions of people have suffered, and it hasn't really shown to. It's shown to be a good sell, but not an actual good solution.
So
because the capital, which is supposed to be shared amongst the proletariat, becomes centralized. And it becomes worse than capitalism because all the capital goes towards one more powerful central entity. You see? So it's a great sell, but I don't think it would work. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. You don't want to hear the arguments then, no? Well, because he's actually engaging in the question rather than behaving like a child. Okay, so I will answer your question. Or better said, address your remarks, because they weren't really a question.
Sorry to interrupt, yeah?
It wasn't really a question.
Sorry.
I didn't say to do my arguing.
Yeah. It was just going around in circles, you know?
Yeah. Well, as yours wasn't really a question, it's a comment.
Yeah.
So the gentleman argued that because, first he said, it was supposed to be for the poor, but it never helped the poor.
It was sold as a solution.
Like, it sold as a solution, but it never helped the poor as your first argument, right? So let's deal with some factual evidence about that question.
Right.
Firstly, in terms of helping the poor in relation to
economic
living standards, economic living standards.
Right.
So, in the last 40 years, living standards improved most dramatically in one country and one country alone, and that was the People's Republic of China. Living standards there rose from a very, very low level to the level of a medium income economy.
China's
today.
Not communist.
It was the fastest growth of any economy in the history of the world, and it raised the largest amount of people, their living standards, out of absolute poverty to a relatively decent standard of living.
China's not
in the
communist.
last 40 years.
It sells itself as communist.
Well, that's what you were talking about.
It's actually fascist.
People selling themselves as communists.
No, it sells itself as a communist state because
so you're
that's
now
a great way to say that it's supporting
you're
the people.
now excluding
but that's not
China
what it actually is.
from that category. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's
on
not
what basis?
The basis that the production is made not by the people do not own the means of production. It's actually
but that's what you said communism does.
Yes, exactly. It's the CC.
So in China they've got what you just described.
Yes, because communism sells itself as helping the people, but actually turns itself into a fascist state.
So you're saying
by nature, because people are corrupt.
Well, I am saying the Communist Party. I mean, I assumed you were talking about. You asked me what countries, so-called communist countries.
It's not communist. There has never been a real communist state.
Vietnam.
I didn't say.
Just
now
a great
you are now
sell.
sounding like
it's a great sell. It's a great sell.
Now you're saying there's never been a communist
state. The poor
state.
always get screwed.
Well, if there's never been a communist state, you can't blame Karl Marx for what happened.
But the sell.
If on the other
trying
side,
to sell the communist
if on the
state.
other side, the argument that you did make,
it's a scam.
There's on video, which was you said, no communist country has been able to raise the economic condition of the people. That's what you say.
In the long term.
And we're not in the long term. And therefore I pointed to a country that calls itself communist, that is the People's Republic of China, that palpably has raised the living standards of the people in the last 40 years at a rate of increase faster than any other country in the history of the world. Now that doesn't mean you have to support the Chinese government. It doesn't mean you say it's definitely the best communist regime ever, but it does mean to say that according to the categorization and statement you made at the beginning, it negates what you suggested.
Deflection against her.
That's not deflection.
Sorry,
that's directly dealing with your argument.
Was because the United States
because otherwise, if I accepted your supplementary qualification, what you said was China doesn't count because China is actually fascist. That's what you said.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. The state controls.
So in other words, you are now saying
it's an oligopoly.
That fascism has raised the living standards of the population of China faster than any country in the history of the world.
Right, and they live in complete slavery.
And you are saying, and you
people
said,
are trying to escape China through barbed wire. You've seen that, yeah? So
I'm
no,
laughing at yours.
they create borders, and people are trying to escape, injuring themselves with barbed wire because they want to get out of there.
I think you're talking about. I think you're talking about.
Well, they don't
East
get the
Germany.
people who are trying to escape. They don't get allowed in airports because their social credit score is too low.
My friend.
What do you laugh?
I don't know where you get this stuff from, but let's break it down one thing at a time. Instead of just making assertions, let's go through one argument at a time and logically construct or deconstruct the relevance of mine or your arguments, or the irrelevance of mine or your arguments, on the basis of logical argument of what you're saying and I'm saying. That's a fair way to debate, isn't it? Because you said you're prepared to debate.
I don't know what you're
So you are now saying that China is fascist. Now, was the Soviet Union fascist? According to your arguments. In other words, you're saying a strong central state in which an elite gain control of society and in which the people are, in your words, enslaved. Was that true for the Soviet Union, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria?
Pretty much, and that's why.
So in other words, you are now saying that communism never existed.
Not really.
What
it's
are you
a
saying?
great cell.
Are you
but
saying, but that cell, you're saying that they sold communism but established fascism. That's what you're saying.
Right.
Yes?
The definition of communism is when the proletariat own the means of production. Right? That's the definition. In the proletariat.
A definition, yep.
The proletariat have never once owned the means of production.
So does that mean that communism has never come about?
It's a great sell because
does it mean that
communism
has been sold as one thing
so
but never come about?
I'm going to leave if you carry on interrupting.
Because we're trying to get to the
Stop
point
interrupting, I'm going to leave.
Go on. I don't want you to leave.
I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. Great sell, you said.
It's a great sell, but once the reality kicks in and the communists gain power, the game completely changes.
For example, Cuba.
It's every communist state.
Every communist state. But
it's
you're
a great
saying,
sell. It's a great sell
right,
because the poor are suffering and they need one an answer.
What you said was,
A billion people come out of poverty.
but what you
in the
said
last 30
was,
years.
what I'm just trying to clarify, because you said to me it's a great sell, but then at some point it changes into something opposite. That's what you're saying, right?
It never changed. It was just a great sell.
So it's just a great sell. So in other words, what you're saying, just one sec. What you're saying is the communists declare that the workers would take power, but actually a fascist regime is established. That's what you're saying, yes or no?
The communists...
You said that about China. Was it true for the other countries?
The leaders of the revolution, they promised that they're going to give all the power production to the people.
Yes.
But that's never what happened.
Yes, I understand that. I understand that. And you all understood what he's saying.
Shows it's a scam.
And you understood what he's saying. He says it never happened. And with the example of China, he said instead of that, fascism was established. That's his argument.
Well,
I asked it as a supplement. Hang on.
All right.
As a supplement, having said China is fascist, I then queried his analysis and said, does that mean that the Soviet Union was also fascist? So yes or no?
Okay. So the Chinese model is a slightly different, is a more advanced fascist model
so it is also
than
fascist.
the Russian. Than the Russian.
So the Russian was fascist, right?
Thank you.
So what you're saying is...
No, I haven't finished. What the Chinese model is a more advanced model of what they want to be a global takeover. It's a mixture.
Who they?
Secret people. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a more advanced where it uses slight capitalism on low-end businesses, low-income medium businesses, but it's a more advanced version of what was implemented in Russia. Almost like Russia was a test bed for China, and then they advanced, made it more efficient, mixed it a little bit with capitalism, made it better for the people to live and not be so bad to the poor, but it's still extremely centralized, and you cannot go against the state in any way. But it's the same idea.
Let me just point one thing.
That the people are the fucking
in the last
slaves,
few years,
you know?
in the last few years, we had dictatorial power imposed on the population across nearly every country in the world, right? In the name of fighting coronavirus, right? Whether we agree with the way they did it or not, dictatorial power was imposed all around the world, right? Is that true or not?
Yes.
Right. In Speaker's Corner, for example, the police attacked us when we came here, right? Some of us remember what happened. Now,
I saw the video.
we protested for 2.5 years to win the right to speak back at Speaker's Corner, to demonstrate, to speak, and to leave our homes without government arresting us. Right? We protested.
Right.
2.5 years. How long did they have to protest in China before the government dropped the regulations? The protests in China began on the 25th of November last year. They ended on the 1st of December. The government dropped all regulations
Totally
on
artificial.
COVID within a week.
Mate,
Within a week
if they didn't
of
want,
protest.
if they didn't want to protest for one day, they wouldn't.
But I thought
There
they were
was-
also scared.
There was
also scared to
Mate,
protest.
there's bigger tactics behind. Maybe they were trying to get people who are against the government to protest so they could single them out and know who is anti-government.
Are they in prison now?
I don't know.
No, they're not.
But
No, they're not.
China has absolute power over every single part of the
Do
society.
they really? How many people live in
Absolutely.
China?
Absolutely.
How many people live in China?
Hey, good speaking to
How
you.
many people live in
I gotta
China?
leave. Good speaking to you. Yeah?
Pleasure.
Yeah,
Another
yeah.
time.
Yeah, good speaking to you.
We'll continue
Take care,
another
take care,
time.
take care.
Okay, how many people live in China? 1.4 billion. The story circulates widely that everybody in China is under some kind of totalitarian dictatorship, whereby if you go down the road and you jaywalk, you get a fine and your face appears on the screen. If you misbehave in any way, you get a social credit rating and you're banned from getting on a train, an aeroplane or a bus. You've all heard the story, right? Social credit system applied to everyone in China. That is not true. Most people in China have never heard of social credit. Never heard of it. They don't know what it is. They've never heard of it. However, there is a social credit system in China. 99% of the use of the social credit system in China is to monitor private companies, big private companies, who like to avoid paying taxes and like to rob people. Those big private companies are under the surveillance of the state, or have increasingly come under surveillance of the state. Look at the front page headline today in the Financial Times. The main headline of today's Financial Times is that the Chinese state is watching what foreign multinational companies do. And that is where social credit actually operates in China. There are some places where small local governments have imposed rules on social credit, like crossing the road or breaking some regulation. But the overwhelming majority of the population, by that I mean 1.3 thousand million people in China, have never experienced anything to do with any social credit system. It is not true that China is run on social credit. However, in Britain, all your mobile phone data is controlled and monitored by the mobile phone company, by the social media companies, and by Google. The idea that you are not monitored in England is risible. You are more monitored by your mobile phone in England than the people in China are by their mobile phone. Because the mobile phone companies in Britain and in America are privately owned and collaborate with the secret services, the National Security Agency, and the intelligence services inside the country. This was exposed by Ed Snowden way back in 2013. He revealed that the NSA, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, and all the main social media companies directly collaborate in transmitting information about everybody in the Western world. For that reason, Ed Snowden is a political refugee in Russia to this day. The other guy who exposed the way in which the intelligence agencies operate is a man by the name of Julian Assange, who has been in prison effectively for 15 years now because the British intelligence agencies, along with the American intelligence agencies, conspired to have him transported to Guantanamo Bay in the United States of America because he revealed evidence about the American military slaughtering people in Iraq in breach of all human rights conventions in the world. That man is now in Belmarsh prison awaiting extradition to America, where they will kill him. So they talk to you about social credit in China, dictatorship in China.
We have a credit score
China
here.
is not a free and democratic country, true, but nor is Britain or America. And those people who believe that we are free and democratic and they are under totalitarian control know nothing about this country and nothing about China.
The credit score system is an absolute joke here. You can't even get a mobile phone if you have bad credit.
Exactly. If I go on my bank account, and my bank account online is Halifax, and every month they update my credit score. And I can click on a button and it comes up whatever the credit score is, and then they tell you how much credit you can get or can't get. That's a credit system in Britain, operating for decades. If you want to move apartment in London, you apply to get a new flat, and they say, please provide a reference from your landlord and 3 months bank statement. That's when I lived in China, you had a paper record of your banking. They've got 1.4 billion people. What is called social credit in China is the gradual process of digitizing paper information, written, by the way, in Chinese. Sorry? Okay, I know what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't exist. As a mass phenomena, it does not exist in China. Different to what? Yeah. Where does that exist then? Yeah, but where does such a thing exist? They're saying it exists in China. I'm telling you, it does not exist in China. Right. Not social credit. His political views. Like Julian Assange in England. Right? Like Ed Snowden in Russia. No, but what I'm saying is there is no more democracy in Britain. And free. I was arrested in the last 2 years 7 times. 7 times. Sorry? Depends on the time. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Do you think the solicitors? I tell you what I tried to do. I tried to take the police to court for illegal arrest, right? In other words, if they arrest you, it's a crime unless they've got justification, right? I tried to take the police to court for illegal arrest and detention. You know what the solicitors firm said? Hodge Jones Allen, the human rights famous solicitors. We will not deal with people who are anti-lockdown. Right? That's what happened in Britain in the last few years. If you've got a point of view and you expressed it in Hyde Park, when you put it on YouTube, they cut you off. To this day, I am not allowed to even look on YouTube and search or make a comment. Right? I am not. So the idea that we are free in England and you can have whatever point of view is not true. Doctors, scientists, experts and political opponents who opposed the dictatorship imposed in Britain over the last 3 years were subject to universal censorship, denigration and attack. Right? So the idea that we are free and democratic and they are under a terrible totalitarian dictator is not true. Now Jimmy Lai and those people in Hong Kong who oppose the government of China, they've got a right to do so, but don't pretend that is not, do not pretend that is not part of a Western plot to overthrow the government of China.
Because he was involved in violent
Now they
riots.
said in the last week
Yes, he was.
in Britain,
He was inciting all the riots.
in Britain,
Same thing's happening in France.
I was on Tiananmen Square. I was on Tiananmen Square. Yes, I was on Tiananmen Square.
Alright, whether you were there or not.
I was
let's
there.
not say Jimmy Lai's being violent.
You were being violent.
Alright, in what way?
He was inciting
They
riots.
orchestrated riots and violence against the government,
So that means,
financed and sponsored by the British and Americans,
that means when they say
inside China.
that's a socialist.
Yes, the National Endowment for Democracy.
That's like
Look,
someone
look,
saying
look. Ask yourself this: where did Hong Kong come from?
that's like someone
Where
saying
did Hong
right
Kong
now,
come from?
Are you starting a riot right now?
No,
So exactly, that would be a false accusation.
it's not a false accusation about that gang in Hong Kong. It's not false. There are multiple. You can look online. One riot after another between 2014 and 2019. One riot after another. Right? Now, when we had a gathering in Hyde Park and stood here to defend our rights, we were attacked by hundreds of police, right? And we fought against them.
Equivalency, it's a false equivalency. Corrupt
Where's the
police-
false equivalency?
Because corrupt police doesn't mean that the Western
That's not corrupt police. They were ordered to attack us by the government. They were ordered to attack us.
Alright, you're saying
But the
we're
government
getting
in
back.
Britain,
We're becoming more socialist. This is why these things are happening.
that's nothing to do with
We're becoming
socialism.
more like
That's nothing to do with
more like
socialism.
communism.
Have you
In
looked at
Hong
the-
Kong,
have you looked at the
the
rules
protesters
Braverman has
were
released?
encouraged to protest. I mean, ask yourself this.
Protests
Remember
are
this.
banned now because of,
During the
Braverman.
anti-lockdown protests,
That's against.
hang on, during the anti-lockdown protests, we were attacked in Britain. Yes or no?
I saw it
Doesn't
on
matter whether you agree with it or not, we were attacked, right? But when anti-lockdown protests started in China, what did the newspapers say here? What did the television say here? They said, long live the freedom fighters in China. That's what they said, right? So lockdown here, you must arrest everyone. Lockdown in China, freedom, democracy. That's what they said.
They were physically locked in their apartments.
When the protests happened in Shanghai, there was no lockdown in Shanghai.
During lockdown.
There was no lockdown in Shanghai in November last year.
All you have to do is do a COVID test in the
I
morning.
know
and
people
you
who
can go wherever you
died
want.
because they were sent to hospitals in Britain and given by the government, ordered by Hancock and Co. We know 30 to 40,000 people who died because of the policies of the government during coronavirus. So don't tell us about how terrible they are over there. Sorry? I know people who are put in mental asylums for joining demonstrations against the lockdowns, right? I know, I went to a demonstration in Clapham Common because a young girl was murdered in the name of lockdown by a police officer. So don't tell us about how the rights of the people in China are so grand and the rights here don't matter. Two wrongs mean you must both say they are wrong, right? Right? You must point out what is wrong, but not just make up rights. I've done it in Beijing. I've done it in Beijing. I've done it in Beijing. Was it? Was it? How do you know? How do you know it was worse? How do you know it was worse?
They
were physically locked in their apartments.
Half of China.
A COVID test every morning. Yeah. And I can go wherever I want.
Which part of China were you in?
I was in Shanghai.
Yes. That's when
Half
we
of China never had a lockdown.
Other provinces, it was far worse.
I went to China wherever I
Shanghai
Hong
was the
Kong.
most cosmopolitan
Hong
place
Kong
in China.
never had a
They were locked in.
lockdown.
I know people who were locked in.
In China. Yes, yes.
Half of China. Half of China.
Once it reached Shanghai, that's when they weren't having it. That's when they weren't having it.
Half of
Because that's
China
more cosmopolitan
never
than
had a
other
lockdown.
provinces.
So they're lying to you.
Other places in China,
They told you on the BBC. They told you on the BBC.
not made it right.
I didn't say that. You wanted facts rather than just bullshit.
Are they worse? Are they worse or is Britain worse? Because
Well-
it's always a matter of degrees. We're not talking
Worse for what?
Alright.
Worse for what?
Are they worse for
At what?
people exercising freedoms and liberties? Like, what we accept-
What is freedom and liberty?
That's what I'm saying. What we would accept.
What does it mean? What do you mean by that?
Freedom of speech. Let's choose one.
Freedom of speech. Well, as I said in the last, I used to think Britain was a country where you had free speech. I spoke here. I'm one of the few people.
Who's worse?
I'm someone who actually uses freedom of speech. Right? I'm not someone who just goes to a meeting and heckles someone. I use it. I use it all over the place. Yes, in England.
Because you're allowed.
And for 35 years, I was speaking at Speaker's Corner. But when the lockdowns came, I was arrested 7 times.
That's wrong.
7 times. So I changed my view about freedom of speech in Britain. I now think freedom of speech in Britain does not exist. It exists, and when you do speak, they monitor you, they survey you, and they prepare to take action against you. They isolate you, they segregate you, and they censor you. So the idea that free speech is the general rule in Britain is not true. Free speech in China, most people I know, for example, in China, they will just say, if you say to them, oh, the government doesn't like what you say, they say, I don't give a fuck what the government says. That's what most people in China say.
And started
Most-
saying it, what would happen to them?
It depends where and when.
All right, they would either get locked up, disappeared, or something drastic.
Well,
okay?
well,
Our
how
system
come
isn't
is it?
perfect,
How
it's
come
a lot
is it?
better.
How come is it that these protests went on from 2014 to 2019 in Hong Kong? How come?
Because they still
There
had
were
the
big
vestiges
protests, right?
Of the freedoms that they shared.
Oh,
under
really?
Britain.
Oh, really?
Yes, oh, really?
Did you know that you didn't
Until
have the right to vote under Britain?
Until COVID happened.
Under British rule,
Hong
there was
Kong
no
was
right
not-
to vote in Hong Kong. Did you
Hong
know
Kong was never
that?
democracy.
Okay,
Did you know that?
we're
How
saying
long
it
did
was
Britain rule
closer to the
Hong
British
Kong?
system than mainland China.
How long did Britain rule Hong Kong?
If we're going to be mature,
Huh?
we can't go for perfection versus
150 years.
completely mad.
Why did
What's
Britain...
better?
I'm answering you in relation to the examples that you give. Right? So the question is this. How did Hong Kong come to be British?
Opium.
A lot of dodgy stuff happened in the past, okay?
It was an opium war, which meant
We're
what?
talking about
What was the
Marble
opium
Arch
war about?
Versus Beijing right now. And in
The
Marble
British
Arch,
wanted the Chinese
in Beijing,
to buy their opium, right?
Please go to Beijing.
So in other words, it's like if I go down to Ladbroke
It
Grove
was wrong.
And
It was
there's an-
wrong. It was wrong.
and they
What we
held
done in
Hong
China was
Kong
wrong.
until 1997, right?
You lot use all the
Did
bad
they-
things to discredit a
Me
British
lot?
citizen.
What me lot?
As in, you communists and Marxists.
You were talking about Britain versus China.
Exactly. How
Hong Kong has both.
Britain doesn't have
So
a
we're
perfect
talking about Hong
record.
Kong.
The opium wars, etc. That's wrong. But it doesn't mean it cancels everything that's right.
I didn't
So
say it
English
cancels.
common law-
I said we're referring to an area where Britain and China have got a connection. Hong Kong, right? That's what we were referring to. You referred to it. So I'm now referring to it. So I'm referring to the background in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a dictatorship under British rule. There was no democracy in Hong Kong under British rule. So, what are you talking about?
All right, but it's,
Right?
even
Once
the dictatorship,
Hong Kong was being handed back to China, suddenly they were all democratic.
better or worse?
Oh, you got free speech, you got right to demonstrate, right to protest, right to newspapers, do whatever you like. After Hong Kong returned to China, they set up the National Endowment for Democracy, as you said. The British intelligence agencies poured in money into Hong Kong to foster unrest in Hong Kong, arguing HongOng must be the citadel of democracy. The consequence of that was,
They understand the relationship that England had, or the United Kingdom had with Hong Kong. It's not going to be a perfect situation where they can, but there's certain guarantees that they understand.
Guarantees.
Within the Anglosphere, we wouldn't accept
What guarantees?
that you would accept in China.
What guarantees?
Okay, let's take a look at slavery, for instance.
What slavery?
In the British Empire, for instance. Okay? Public opinion eventually led to people saying, no, that is wrong. So we're not saying it's
Partly.
perfect, but we know
Partly.
English public opinion would support Hong Kong rights more than mainland Chinese public opinion.
Hong Kong rights, meaning what?
The general political system that they lived on. Yes, it wasn't perfect. I
You
don't
know,
know.
last week, Rishi Sunak, in fact yesterday, the day before, Rishi Sunak said, there's a report by the intelligence agencies. The Chinese are influencing British economy. We must panic. The Chinese are everywhere, trying to influence politics. That's what they said in the news, right? Did they not? Last couple of days.
They do have a boogeyman of China, but that doesn't make China perfect.
I mean,
doesn't make them perfect.
does China control Northern Ireland?
What point are you making?
If China controlled Northern Ireland and had a whole load of people in Northern Ireland funded by like the IRA, funded by the Chinese, you might have a point. But Hong Kong is like that.
I'm sorry, is
The
their
British-
system better than capitalism?
Well, I believe there is, but I believe there should
It's
be.
not possible.
That's not true.
Who says it's not
Capitalism
possible?
is the greatest system ever created in history.
That's your view. Because of what?
It drives innovation.
Have you seen how many
You can
homeless
patent
people there are in the
vaccines,
United States?
you can patent pharmaceuticals.
What?
You can patent. Thomas Edison, he got the patent.
He didn't patent
on
a
the light
vaccine.
bulb. No, the light bulb.
Yeah, what about it?
Well, that drives innovation. That knows your heart. If you work hard on something, you can make a
He's
profit.
saying it does
Is that the only
encourage
way you can
innovation.
invent something?
Yes.
The only way you can invent
Socialism
something?
does not work.
So,
If I'm working hard
for example,
we get the same results.
It was a universal evil. How long
okay.
are we going to talk about
let's firstly refer.
It was
Let's
everywhere.
firstly refer
All
not
right,
to
slavery
communism.
was stopped in the British Empire.
The most
It was
industrialized.
stopped
One
in the
at a
British
time,
Empire.
one at a time.
Now this guy came asking me about slavery.
No, we're talking about capitalism.
He was first. Go on.
Sorry, I was saying, the United States, which was the strongest country in the world right now, with the greatest military, and it's following the capitalist system. I think that's just the best way to go.
And yes, it's corrupt. You do have corporatists. You do have people that abuse the capitalist system.
Let me try and
But
respond.
he's making a fair point.
He's making a point about what he thinks is economic argument, right? You're not making a political argument at the moment. You're not making a political argument. You're making an economic argument. You're saying that the fact that you have
It's one and the same, though. It's one and the same.
they may or may not be. For example, Adolf Hitler's Germany was also capitalist.
It was socialist.
Was it
The
socialist?
nationalist socialist.
How was it socialist? No, I'm not talking about words. I'm talking about words.
They were socialists.
Fascist Italian.
All right, so they were called the Socialist Party, but they weren't socialist. They weren't socialist. You don't just don't want to own them.
I agree, it
They
wasn't
were
socialist.
They were socialist.
Why were they socialists?
Huh?
How do you define socialism?
No. They define themselves as socialists. They define
They
themselves as
may have
socialists.
defined themselves as socialists.
Exactly.
My friend, lots of people call themselves all sorts of things.
All right.
Doesn't
Name
mean
me a
they are
British
what they call
party
themselves.
that calls themselves socialist.
They called them the National Socialist Workers' Party. True. Doesn't mean they were. Right? You're not something because you call yourself something, right? Much
No,
as
but
some
that's
people
what
like to
they
think that is the
identify
case.
it
No.
as.
Sorry?
It's like you would say, started, he wasn't a real Marxist.
No, I'm not arguing that. That's not the discussion I'm having.
Because we always
Legitimately,
say that
I'm
whoever
asking
calls
you.
himself a socialist, a Marxist, a communist.
So are you
Party
saying to
party-
me that any government that's dictatorial and capitalist is socialist?
They were
Are you saying
socialists.
that?
They weren't
Are you saying the Argentinian junta in the 1970s was socialist? Are you saying the Brazilian junta was socialist? Are you saying that Colombia under the dictators was socialist? Are you saying that Britain in under the kings was socialist? Are you saying that Germany under the Kaiser was socialist? Are you saying that France under the monarchy was socialist?
Yeah, well,
Were they?
What happened when the socialists got
No,
in charge?
right. In
What
other
happened when
words-
the socialists got in charge?
Sorry?
The French the French Revolution. What happened when the socialists got in charge?
They executed
Socialist.
Chaos, murder.
What socialists?
All right.
Robespierre was a socialist.
Rousseau and his guys and his
Socialist.
I think they were anti-monarchy, anti-establishment.
So then they were socialists.
Okay.
They were
Are they on
capitalists.
the left or the right? All right.
They were
everyone's-
capitalists. They were the creators of capitalism.
All right. Yeah. They were
Yes.
the creators of
Yes, they
capitalism.
were.
Right, yeah.
Liberty, equality, fraternity. That's capitalism.
Started, producing.
That's capitalism. That's what it
They
means.
started division of labor.
Liberty, equality, fraternity.
You
The
just
slogans of the French Revolution. All equal in the eyes of the law. Capitalism. That's what it is.
So socialism doesn't believe everyone's equal in the eyes of the law.
Socialism believes that the public ownership of the means of production can lay the foundation for real equality and not just legal equality with inequality ingrained. That's the distinction between capitalism and socialism, which you haven't understood.
And People abuse.
Right.
The dollar, Czechoslovakia, the dollar, Republican France. Okay, what am I going on?
Well, just let, the gentleman here wanted to have an economic discussion about the logic of capitalism, rather than engage in the political. That's when we got on to fascism and other regimes. Because I pointed out there are capitalist countries that have been dictatorships, and therefore the dictatorship argument is one argument we can deal with slightly separately. What you were arguing was that the innovation of capitalism, in other words, the profit motive drive of capitalism.
Who started?
Hang on. The profit motive drive of capitalism means it's the most innovative and productive system in the history of the world. Now,
Precisely, yeah.
now,
The Henry Ford model.
now, hang on. Let the discussion flow without getting freaky about it. There's no need. Yeah, because you're getting all personal about it. You're getting all personal about it, and it makes your arguments lack in depth. That's the problem. Once you get too emotional about it, you're not really able to argue the case. So I'm just arguing. Take a step back. Let's discuss the. Now, in fact, in the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, he describes capitalism as the most dynamic and energetic and innovative system in the history of the world. That's what he says. So you're merely repeating what Karl Marx said. Now, I don't dispute that. It certainly was the most productive and energetic system and innovative system in the history of the world. You okay with that, are you? Marx said that. Yeah, you okay with that?
If Marx said 2 + 2 = 4, I'd agree.
I wouldn't believe it.
Right, okay, so Communist Manifesto, you can look at it. It's in there.
I read it.
So, now, following from that, what he said was, the problem is that capitalism is also ridden by internal contradictions which cause it to create a permanent increase in the wealth of the wealthiest and a permanent instability on the condition of the majority of the population. And it goes through cycles of expansion in which everything appears to be going well. One sec. And then cycles of contraction when things start turning shit. And then it also throws forth periods of democracy and freedom replaced by periods of dictatorship and repression. And that is a reality of what we see.
Communism
And the reason why...
Communism is absolute dictatorship, where central government has to enforce every single thing. No, yeah, and why do you want to say like? Why do you think that capitalism is evil?
So what you are saying is, well, we're trying to deal with one issue at a time. Because clearly, everybody could shout at me at once and we wouldn't have a discussion. Or we could discuss one argument and another argument and work out between ourselves in rational and logical debate which arguments have strength and which are weak. That's a reasonable method. Unfortunately, the guy's left now. I was arguing about the economic structure. So Marx argued that capitalism was, as the gentleman who left said, a dynamic economic system. However, he said, it has internal contradictions which give rise to crises, wars and revolutions. If it didn't do that, if capitalism from the 19th century onwards had merely expanded and established democracy and freedom across the world in the image of England, France, Germany or America, had it done so, then of course South America, Africa, India, Russia, China would all have established democratic regimes, raising their living standards, letting people speak, discuss, debate, form unions, form political parties, and establish democratic, wealthy countries in the image of America. Is that what happened?
No, but
And if not, why not?
you're saying America. Look, you've got the America that the founding fathers envisioned.
So why didn't that spread to South America?
And then you've got the America of, like, say, the Bushes and the Clintons.
I'm not on about the Clintons or the
You
Bush.
can't make a false equivalency.
I'm
and
not
say,
talking about
because
Clinton or
of-
Bush.
Exactly.
I'm
No,
not
I agree.
talking about Clinton or
saying
Bush.
You can't use.
I'm not talking about Clinton or
You
Bush.
can't use
I'm
monopoly
asking
capitalism.
why the ideal model of America the American
Which
Revolution,
America? Which America?
Thomas
Which
Jefferson,
America?
Abraham Lincoln.
Exactly.
Why did that not spread to the rest of the
Because
world?
it got hijacked by a different form of America.
I'm not talking about America. I'm talking about Africa, South America, India, China, Soviet, Russia. Why did they not become democratic capitalist states? Why did they not become democratic capitalist states? Why were they corrupt?
No oversight. You have to have the rule of law with capitalism. One without the other.
But why didn't they do that? If capitalism is such a spontaneously correct system for mankind to establish in the image of America, why didn't it happen in the rest of the world?
Because of the application.
Why? Because of the application. What, sorry?
The other continents needs to be used later on for wars and other things, because it's all coming from one source, one religion, everything.
What religion?
And the bankers
What
run the
religion?
world. The bankers
What
run
religion?
it. Keep
So
quiet,
are
the
you
bankers-
saying that once capitalism established its ideal form in America, let's use the term ideal form, let's hang on, just bear with me 1 minute, bear with me 1 minute, 1 minute to let us go one step further. The argument that I made was, I asked, why is it that the model countries of capitalism, the democratic,
False equivalency.
where's the equivalency?
Because you're saying everything British is capitalism.
didn't say
Everything American is capitalism. Capitalism hasn't fully been tried. As in, okay, is Amazon capitalism? Is Amazon capitalism? We're not talking about monopoly capitalism. We're talking about
Capitalism was expanding and growing.
we're talking about
up
private
until 1914. What happened? Instead of democratic expansion to the entire world, something totally different happened. War. Where did the war come from? Was it accident? Archduke Ferdinand? Germany invaded Belgium and the British heroes went to save. Is that what happened? Or what happened? What was the First World War about?
Go on, you tell me.
Cousins fighting.
It was
you
about
tell me. Belgium.
the first wealthy capitalist countries cutting the world up into their own terrains
The
of control.
people of those capitalist countries or the rulers.
Rulers.
Exactly. So that's
That's
not
capitalism.
then. No, it's not.
What are you talking
How
about?
is it? Capitalism is
You think
it's crony capitalism. That's
What do you mean crony
That's corporatism.
capitalism?
It's very different.
Capitalism must surely require two classes for its existence. The capitalist, you're welcome, my friend, come another time. The capitalist class, the owners of the means of producing wealth.
You
And the
accumulate
workers,
your wealth
yes or no?
and invest
Must they
it,
not
you will
have
eventually
workers?
end up at that level.
1 minute. I'll let you come in. I'll come back to all that in a minute. The central argument is this. A capitalist system must have workers to work so that people can accumulate capital. Otherwise, where's the capital coming from?
And the workers
Suck out their thumb?
can accumulate their capital.
Well, that's
later
another
on
question.
invest.
We'll come on to that now.
And this is where it's
We'll
all
come
about.
on to that now.
I mean, socialism is the unequal
I'm gonna-
is the equal spread of misery,
Okay.
while capitalism
Okay.
is the unequal spread of happiness.
Now,
It's about your
Now, the
personal
gentleman
work.
here is arguing that capitalism provides the opportunity, as is said in the American ideal, as is said in the ideals of capitalism, Adam Smith, Ricardo, Sismondi and the others, as is said by
Frederick
Milton
Hayek,
Friedman,
don't forget him.
as is said by Hayek. They all say capitalism is a bit like a gambling casino. You go in there, you put your money chips down, some you win, some you lose.
Depends on your skill.
Those who go to the top may be clever and smart. Those who end up at the bottom, bad luck, but they can try again. Come back with one chip
Freedom to
and you
try
can
again.
try again. That's the freedom that this gentleman is lauding as the freedom of capitalism. However, the reality is that doesn't happen.
Oh yes, it does. Rockefeller.
Because what actually
His father
happened,
was a swindler.
what
and
actually
he
happened.
started investing. No, I'm giving you an
I'm not-
example to the
no,
top
no,
of the
you are
world
giving,
for nothing.
you are proving the opposite of what your argument
How
is.
so?
Because what you are saying is some of the most wealthy people in the world, and there's like about
Before they were wealthy.
hang on,
Before they were
there's
wealthy.
about 400 billionaires in the world today, right? they own more wealth than like 60-70% of the world's population. And you are saying you could become like them. I'm not denying that. Maybe tomorrow I'll win a lottery. Maybe tomorrow some money will come my way. I'll invest it in something special. I'll become a billionaire. I'll run a big company called Speaker's Corner Limited or Karl Marx Limited, and that company will be so successful that I'll control 300,000 workers. I'll make 7 billion, 10 billion a day. I'll be right up where the Elon Musk. That's the ideal.
Regulation comes in.
The ideal of capitalism. I don't need to be regulated because I'll be so good to everybody.
No,
right?
it's hand in hand.
I will be like that. I'll be marvelous.
You're amazing.
I'll be a marvelous capitalist, right? So you won't need to regulate me. That could happen in theory. More likely, however, for the majority of the people at Speaker's Corner and the majority of people in England, let alone the majority of people in Europe or the majority of people in the world, that's not going to happen. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but it's not going to happen.
Because
we can say with certainty that 90% of the world, in fact 98% of the world, 99% of the world, in fact 99.999% of the world, we can say with certainty that will not happen. And so if you're saying to people that we have 99.999% certainty that you will not become a billionaire, and 99.99% certainty that you won't become a 5 million millionaire, and 99.9% certainty that you won't become a 2 million millionaire, and 99.9% certainty that you won't become a millionaire, and 99% certainty that you won't become a 100,000 owner in the world, then you can start out from the facts rather than from the delusion.
No, if you
but
have,
you're starting from a
Can
delusion.
you give me 60 seconds?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Assuming someone has, let's say, an excess income of £1,000 per month. Is that fair? An excess income of £1,000, £500, anything like that. If someone studies something specific, a specific industry, let's say coffee, let's say oil, and he plays something like the options market, with rigor, he is able to get to that gap. And this is
how many in 100?
No, this is the thing. If you study,
how many in 100?
You can play that too.
I was just giving percentages. How many in 100?
But the thing is, you have the opportunity to place that bet, and you're not
I
forced.
deny that.
You're not forced into labor.
That?
You're not forced into labor.
I denying that?
The road to serfdom starts with this kind of thought. Otherwise, it's an open playing field.
You mean with
like
facts?
The wild west.
Facts.
Like we're like assuming we're.
Sorry.
Yes.
You're saying
I'm giving
someone
you facts.
can gamble on the stock market.
Not gamble,
and make money.
invest. And I'm talking to the opportunity.
Invest on the stock market.
Yes.
Gamble on the stock market.
Yes.
Let us choose your word.
Okay.
Someone can invest and make money.
Do you think?
Yes.
Oh,
true.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Does that negate your argument?
The opportunity.
Does that disprove my argument?
You have this
No.
opportunity.
I said that a minute ago.
You have that.
I gave
Did you give me 2 minutes?
for different layers.
Did you give me 2 minutes? I'm telling you.
So were the
have the
percentages I
opportunity.
gave roughly wrong or roughly right?
Let me give at least
Were they
30
right
seconds.
or wrong?
When you have excess income, you have the freedom to invest that in where you see fit. And if you spend 2 years studying something specific and then placing your bet, we would be better off than gambling. And when you have socialism, you could be forced into labor, like the Soviet Union and the gulags. Assalamu alaikum.
If people, hang on, we go in, come back, all is forgiven. You got the 2 minutes, then ran away. That's a statement, not a question.
What is your basic proposition? What are you arguing for?
Well,
I just got here.
I was trying to. Oh no! I have to start again because of you. He's just got here. I have to start all over again. How long's it been going on? An hour already, and I have to start all over again. The idea of capitalism, that you have democracy and freedom, was anchored in certain countries in the world. The first capitalist countries. But once they established democracy and freedom in America, in England, in France, which was a long, bitter struggle, in which the working classes secured that freedom. In America, slightly different, but in Britain, in Germany, in France, in the European countries, it was the working classes who got the right to vote. It didn't come from above, it came from below. In fact, Speaker's Corner is one of the locations where it happened. In 1866, there was a giant riot in Hyde Park, which got us the majority, for the first time, of men, that is, got the right to vote. Women got the right to vote in 1928. Capitalism, you will admit, has been around a bit longer than that. And so it was an encroachment against capitalism that secured democracy. Now, having started out with that principle, we then ask, well, okay, that's capitalism for you, and democracy. But why did the rest of the world not get it? Why did India, which in theory India is capitalist, in theory India is democratic, but in reality a third of the population to this day are of the lower caste. A third of the population.
So what is your proposition?
My proposition is that capitalism became a system of global domination by the wealthiest countries over the rest of the world. And inside the capitalist countries became a system of de facto wage enslavement of the majority of the population who live in relative penury, even in the United States of America. Even in the wealthiest country in the world,
That's not really true, because
the majority of the population are exploited and poor and have no real savings to speak of which they can invest, as is claimed. You were saying, sorry?
No, I'm saying people are far better off in the world, economically, health, etc., than they ever were.
Who?
Everybody, as a whole. I mean, I'm not.
That isn't true, actually.
Not every individual.
That isn't true. In the United States of America, for a period of decades, living standards of the middle class and the working class have been falling. In Britain, they've been falling for about 10 years. In Europe, most countries, they've been falling for 10 years. So it's just not true. In India, they've been falling the last 2 years. In Africa, well, part of Africa, they've gone up, largely because of Chinese investment. The only country where there's been a long-term rise in living standards for the majority of the population is China. That's just a fact. I mean, it's not whether you're a moral judgment, it's a fact. Gulf states, that is also true. Sorry, my mistake. You're right. Most of the Gulf states, largely because of certain raw materials they got, have been able to raise living. But it's a little bit of a con, you know. In Saudi Arabia, for example, if you're a member of the royal family, you know, the 100,000 members, they all get like £1 million a year to live on and buy themselves a gold Ferrari and drive round the Edgware Road.
So what are you
going to visit prostitutes all day long. So I mean, it's not really the people who really work in the Gulf states. They live in penury. The people who do the work in the Gulf states, most of them come from Pakistan or India or Sri Lanka, and they do the real work. And they get 45 degrees temperature, they work like dogs, and they have their passports taken off them, and they are slaves. So to say that Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Qatar and these countries and Dubai are like free countries, it's not really true.
Russia's living standards have actually improved as well.
Russia's living standards have not really improved significantly. Not really. 1998, there was a period. There's a short period recently. For a long time, the majority of the working population of Russia and the old age pensioners in Russia, they've had very poor living standards.
What do you propose then?
Well, I'm a socialist. I'm advocating public ownership of the decisive levers of the economy and democratic control over work.
If socialism is such a great idea, how do you explain in Europe, especially?
Yes, I'm Canadian.
And in Canada?
Yeah, it's pretty much flavor of that.
That's died because of socialist ideas.
It's a false estimate.
Well, okay, it's a wild one. In the case of Maximilian, who, as you know, led the French Revolution and coined the phrase, why was he murdered by his own people? Why was he murdered by the very people that he was attempting to free?
That's a good question.
From that capitalist,
for
he was guillotined.
For capitalism.
Why, and sorry to cut you off, and why is that point in history phrased as a reign of terror?
That's a very good question, because in all revolutions, and that's why often revolutionary communists or socialists refer to the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a capitalist revolution. a revolution to overthrow the monarchical power and the landed estates. And the landed estates. People arguably, but they're not.
Arguably a socialist.
He was not a socialist. None of them were
Maximilian
socialists.
was arguably a socialist.
So was Jesus Christ. Doesn't make him a socialist. The conditions in France,
Moving the goalposts.
it's not moving the
He was a
goalposts,
socialist.
it's what is possible.
He had socialist ideas.
Okay, having socialist ideas doesn't make you a socialist. And it doesn't mean you can establish socialism. So the reason why Marx and his followers refer to the French Revolution as the Great French Revolution, attempting to establish capitalism, is because they were fighting against an order of feudal control, landed estates, the church, and the aristocracy. They controlled society, just as in England, before 1649, the kings and the landed estates were controlled by barons and lords, right? That wasn't capitalism either.
How many were murdered
Right?
during the French
That wasn't
Revolution?
capitalism either.
How many were murdered?
The French Revolution
How many were murdered?
murdered many people in order to establish capitalism. And it was a bloody affair. And the reason for that that comes onto the question as to why some people used socialist terminology and why I said that doesn't matter. Because the reality of France was the only thing they could establish other than feudal regime was capitalism. They could liberate capital, the accumulated wealth amongst the middle classes and the upper classes, to invest, to make money by production, by modern forms of production. Not artisanal production for a wealthy king, not one individual toy made of gold that a king could have in his possession, like a crown or a piece of jewellery, but production of things for profit. Making chairs for sale, making tables for sale, making jewellery for sale to wide layers of the population, and establishing a marketplace for things for sale that are produced for profit. That's capitalism. And that was the only possible option in France after the revolution. Whether people wanted communism or not is irrelevant. Just the same as it was irrelevant in England. At the time of the English Civil War, in 1640 to 1649, the Cromwellians, the Roundheads, had very common form of military outfit. They had levellers who wanted to level the wealth out. They had the diggers who went to Weybridge, St George's Hill, and they dug the land, and they said, when Eve sowed and Adam span, who was then the gentleman? They were communistic in their thinking, but the only possible outcome of the English Revolution was either feudalism or capitalism. Even though people said they wanted communism, it didn't matter. Any more than when Jesus Christ said, it's harder to pass into the kingdom of heaven than it is for a rich man, than it is to put a camel through the eye of a needle. But when he wanted to create communism, he went down to the beach and there was only 5 fish and 5 loaves of bread. So he needed magic, God, to provide communism. Communism wasn't possible because the material conditions for communism did not exist. They didn't have 5,000 loaves of bread. They didn't have 5,000 fish. In France, they didn't have the material condition for communism. So all they could do was establish capitalism. And they did establish capitalism. And it took hundreds of years for that capitalism in France and in England and to be established in America and Europe as a model, a democratic, ideal capitalist system.
Why has communism
But once
failed?
they established it, they didn't spread it to Russia, to Africa, to South America, to China. Instead, when they appeared in China, and they appeared in India, and they appeared in Africa, they appeared with swords and guns, and they robbed the people of Africa, India, and China in order to get resources to transport back to England to give to layers of the working class because they wanted to prevent revolution in England and enrich themselves from the entire planet. From the time of 1914, the time of the World War, that is when capitalism ceased to be progressive. When they're sending everyone to slaughter each other, the idea that that was done for freedom and democracy was always a lie. The idea that the Second World War was fought for freedom and democracy was also a lie. The idea that we fought in Iraq for freedom and democracy was a lie. The idea that we fought in Afghanistan for freedom and democracy is a lie. The idea that we are fighting in Ukraine for freedom and democracy is a lie. It's one lie after another. So there is a systematic methodology of understanding this dynamic. Why did the French Revolution end up in dictatorship? Because the conditions were not right for the full development of capitalism.
So despite the fact
So they had to reverse part of the revolution.
despite the fact that millions have died under socialism and are dying
And
today,
millions have died under
and
capitalism.
Wait a moment. Despite the fact that millions have died under socialist ideas, are still dying to this day, and if you're honest, people are attempting to flee socialist countries. You think that's a much better idea than capitalism?
What I'm
estimates are 100 million people have died
describing
under socialist
what happened in the world.
regimes.
You said to me, when the French Revolution occurred, there was violence and terror.
It was called. It was.
I
the
tried to
reign of
explain
terror.
to you, and I think if you check up, do a bit of research, you'll find what I said was correct. This was a
No, you
capitalist
disagreed that
revolution.
Maximilian
I said
was
this was
right.
a cap. I didn't say that.
disagreed.
What I
He
said
wasn't a
was,
capitalist.
I said he couldn't establish communism, whether he wanted to or not. He couldn't do so. And in fact, they established capitalism. And by establishing capitalism, even though it was dragged through blood to establish capitalism, it was progress. It was progress. It was progress. And so
By the
too,
very people he tried to free.
and so I explained
How
to you.
ironic.
Well, I'm trying to explain to you the dynamics of history. Are you telling me there was a way around that? Are you trying to tell me there was a way around that? Maybe there's an alternative scenario. Maybe, hang on, maybe there's an alternative. Let me just, well, because it's too easy an argument to deal with.
Come on.
It's too easy an argument to
You
deal
can't
with.
just discard the deaths of
Discard what?
millions. Well,
I'm trying to explain
Socialism
how
is better than
things have come
capitalism.
about and how we can understand the dynamics we see. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say that's fantastic over there.
Are you presenting socialism as a better idea than capitalism?
Yes? Obviously I'm trying to do that.
Millions have died under socialism.
But I just explained to you, millions have died under capitalism.
Yeah, I know.
Are you rejecting that
okay, so
idea?
capitalism is
Are you
worse because
hang
millions have
on.
died under capitalist
If you
ideas,
say
but
millions
under
have died,
socialist
if
ideas,
you say
that's kind of okay,
if you say millions have died under capitalism,
which they have.
right, okay, so that's fine.
And millions have
That's
died
fine.
under socialism.
I'm not denying that.
Right.
So,
why is
so then we can
capitalism
look
any
at the
worse than
world.
socialism?
Hang on, that means surely if millions have died under capitalism and millions have died under socialism, we can look at the world and say, well, what's the alternative?
You are saying that socialism.
Yes, but I'm like you're proposing, and like other people have been proposing, some ideal form of capitalism.
I'm not proposing capitalism.
People have been proposing
I'm here questioning
ideal
your
forms of
belief
capitalism.
That socialism is a better idea than
Because I believe
millions
I
have died
believe
at
it's
the hands of
correct to
socialism,
say.
and they're attempting to flee socialist countries.
I believe it's correct to
If
say
it's such a great
that
idea.
despite the terror in France after the French Revolution,
Despite millions, thousands,
terror in France.
Maximilian murdered thousands, and you say despite
not many
that,
people at Speaker's Corner are going to get uptight about people being killed in the French Revolution. Not many people. Right? Doesn't mean it's not a relevant point. It is, but not many people are going to get excited or
I call it
motivated by
passion.
it.
I'm not uptight, I call it passion.
But you're
I'm
not
challenging-
passionate about the
I'm-
French
I'm-
Revolution.
No, I'm passionate about challenging your idea that socialism is a better idea
That's
than
fine.
capitalism.
That's fine. So let's move on from just the French Revolution and Maximilian.
No, socialism. Let's deal with socialism.
But that's
and
not
the- and the
socialism.
millions that have died under socialism.
Well, I think
Let's
in
deal
order,
with that.
you asked me, am I socialist? I said yes. Right? Why am I socialist? Because I know millions died under capitalism, millions died under what's called socialism, and I believe that there is an alternative to what happened in both parts of the world, and that is socialism. Just the same as people said that in capitalism wasn't realised. People were arguing here all afternoon. They've been saying, yeah, but that wasn't really capitalism. Adolf Hitler, that's not capitalism. They were saying, oh, America, yeah, but if America, that's oligopoly capitalism. That's not real capitalism. People saying, oh, Amazon, that's not capitalism. That's not real capitalism. People turn around and say, imperialism, that's not capitalism. That's not real capitalism. So I can turn around and say, I believe that democracy over work and public ownership of the decisive levers of the economy is what socialism as an ideal is. And I believe that that is viable today, everywhere in the world. So that's my argument. I don't think it's such a mystical argument. There's nothing in the argument that democracy at work and public ownership must lead to dictatorship and death, is there?
What's left of democracy?
Sorry?
What's left of democracy now?
What's left?
Over the last 3 years, what's left?
Nothing really of democracy left at the moment.
So you can't
but,
really use it,
but democracy, well, you can, because many people believe in the struggle for them to express themselves, for them to organise themselves, for them to protest and demonstrate.
We've been here for the last 3 years. It goes nowhere.
Sorry?
It goes nowhere.
Well, I believe the reason why I'm a socialist, as opposed to an anarchist, or as opposed to some of the other factions that exist around fighting for freedom and democracy, is because I believe the central question which can resolve the problems we've been confronting in the last years and over the last few hundred years is public ownership, and democratic control over the decisive levers of the economy. What was your point?
You have the examples of Lenin, of Stalin and Mao. Now explain that. Explain that the social, how that therefore
But I thought a minute ago,
was a great idea.
A minute ago you told me.
A better idea than capitalism.
A minute ago you asked, have millions died under socialist regimes? Yes.
Exactly.
Right?
So how is that
Have
a better
million-
idea than
Come on.
capitalism?
Surely you can go one step beyond the equation of our.
Are these deaths not important?
Surely you can go. Death isn't important. Death comes to all human beings. Yes, I said it.
People murdered by an idea, and that's not important.
They're not murdered by an
Socialism is
idea.
an idea.
They're murdered in
It's an idea.
circumstances
It's an idea.
where you attempt to move society from one condition to another.
How many died
As they were in the
how many
French
died
Revolution,
under Mao?
as they were in the
How many
British
died under
Revolution,
Mao?
as they were in the First
How
World
many
War.
died under Mao?
I don't know. Estimates vary from up to about 3 million people
What about
in
Pol
the
Pot?
in the
Pol Pot?
in the Great Leap Forward. Yeah? Why did they die? Yeah, Mark, why did they die?
I'm waiting for your
They
explanation.
died not because of communism. They died because of the attempt to develop the economy rapidly, way beyond what was possible in China at the time, which caused economic dislocation and starvation amongst some sections of the population. Just the same as in the Second World War, when the British government wanted to mobilise forces for the army, for the Western Front, against the Nazis, they stole resources from West Bengal and starved 3 million people to death. Do you know that?
Yeah, go on.
3 million people starved to death. So here you have it. In the Second World War, for the great cause of the freedom of England, 3 million people in India were starved to death. For the cause of trying to develop China, a mistaken policy was adopted which led to 3 million deaths. There is an equation. Both were done in the name of something. Both resulted in 3 million
Can I
deaths.
ask a question?
Okay?
What's happening in Ukraine?
What's happening in Ukraine is an attempt by Western powers to extend their influence over large parts of the world, starting with the terrain closest to Russia, and over the bread baskets of the world, which of course we know, we know because when the Ukraine war began, suddenly all around the world prices of food went up, even though the Ukrainians, particularly the Western Ukrainians, not the Donbass, the Western Ukrainians have the lowest living standards in the whole of Europe. The lowest living standards. Average income before the war was about $300 a month. $300 a month, you can't live on that. The Ukrainians were in poverty. The rulers of Ukraine are billionaires, in hoc with the West and in hoc with the Russian oligarchs, at least in the past. And they presided over a country that provides food for huge swathes of the world's population, and yet they lived in poverty. So that tells you something about what actually was going on in Ukraine and actually is going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is not about freedom. The war in Ukraine is about power. It's about power. West wants to exercise its power against Russia as a launching pad for war against China. And they're prepping you all for war against China. They're prepping you, they're grooming you for war against China. One day we must fight the Chinese because they released COVID on the world. COVID did not come from China. It did not come from China. They found samples in September 2019 in Italy. 14% of the population of Italy were infected with COVID in the summer of 2019. So how can it come from a Wuhan lab in December? And what ended the war what ended the war against the virus? The war in Ukraine. One day to the next, COVID was abolished and everyone no longer had COVID. They don't even look for COVID anymore, right? How many of you took a COVID test last week? How many? Nobody, right? But one time they take a test, stick this thing up your nose, stick it in a jar. What the line? Are the lines there? Oh my God! Now it's all gone. But you got a jab in your arm, 2 jabs, 3 jabs, 4 jabs, 5 jabs. Now excess deaths. So what was it all about? It had nothing to do with freedom, democracy and healthcare. It had everything to do with power, profits and politics, and pharma, big pharma and big tech. I've been speaking for a while, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much. See you again next week.
Can I ask you a question?
No,
No, of course you don't.